Welcome everyone, and good morning. This is our fourth episode of Governance Live as we lead up to Governance Week 2024, which we expect to be an exceptional week of conference with us here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. I'm very pleased today that we have someone who is very near and dear to us at CCGI. Carmel Haynes is the Executive Director of the Barbados International Business Association. And Carmel is someone who has been very deeply involved with CCGI for several years now. As a matter of fact, over the years, I could rely on Carmel to help me get speakers from Barbados to ensure that we live up to our reputation as a Caribbean-based organization. And now I'm so proud to say she's also a member of our board of directors at CCGI. So Carmel, welcome to Governance Live today.
Thank you so much, Kamla. I'm very happy to be here and joining you this morning, being able to share my perspective from Barbados and also to really encourage all of our viewers and members of CCGI to participate in our upcoming Governance Week.
Yes, awesome. So I wanted to get a little bit of background about you, Carmel, your involvement with governance on the whole, what attracted you to CCGI, and a little bit about BIBA as well.
Okay, thanks, Kamla. Well, I'll start from what is BIBA. So BIBA is a not-for-profit association of roughly 140 member firms in Barbados. As such, it is run by a board of volunteers who are all executives in their own right and leaders of companies. And supporting that board is our secretariat. We have a small secretariat for employees, which I head up. And this has been really my trajectory has been throughout most of my professional career, I have worked with not-for-profits. So prior to working with BIBA, I would have worked with the University of the West Indies for one of their departments there as a corporate communication specialist. And actually, that's really where I first got to understand a little bit more about governance and become interested in governance, because I was the communications officer for a project called the Marine Governance in the Eastern Caribbean project. And that's where I learned about, the concept of good governance, not just governance, but good governance, the principles of good governance, participatory management, the understanding of engaging stakeholders, and the importance of governance, good governance, again, to ensuring that, people are meeting their fiduciary responsibilities, and acting in a professional, ethical manner, etc. And so then, that has stayed with me. And I have been involved in several boards, not necessarily corporate boards, but again, as I said, I support the board of directors here with BIBA. I would have served, having been the past president of our Optimist Club in Barbados, I would have served on those boards for several years. In terms of the International Association of Business Communicators, I'm a past vice president, and so I would have served on those boards. So my experience has been a lot of dealing with not-for-profits, charitable, etc. boards. And I really finding, the difference between serving on those types of boards and serving on corporate boards, and trying to bring what I learned now with CCGI about good governance and corporate boards into those spaces.
So the first time I actually came across you, you had registered for a session with CCGI, and then I saw your interest because you came more than once, So what were the things that attracted you about CCGI initially?
Well, beyond my interest in governance, I also consider myself, a pan-Caribbean person. And the fact that there was this organization that was trying to, spread this message of good governance throughout the Caribbean, trying to engage members, participants, etc., from across the Caribbean. And also, I really liked your commitment, Kamla, to always trying to have different voices and different perspectives contend from the different islands. So that was what attracted me. And of course, also being able, once I heard those perspectives, to understand that everybody in their own little island, their own little insularity, they don't necessarily recognize that there are other people also dealing with the same issues. We do share certain cultural heritages, and it also has an impact on the way in which we interact and we deal with things. And so therefore, it was also very interesting to hear those perspectives that I realized were very similar. We looked at COVID, we looked at women on boards, we've looked at so many different things, artificial intelligence, etc. All of these things that are being grappled with in different islands, sustainability, and that we can share ideas, share best practices, understand how we are dealing with it in our own island, but then being able to spread those ideas and messages across the Caribbean and see how we can collectively find solutions. So that was what I really enjoyed about the CCGI, and therefore when the opportunity came to be a board member, I also wanted, to step forward and put my hat in the ring, because again, it's very much about having a Caribbean presence, a pan-Caribbean presence within this organization. So I wanted to be able to contribute to that.
Yes, excellent. Well, we are very, very happy to have you. So let's talk a little bit now. As you say, across the region, we have the different countries trying to deal with issues which are common to us, but maybe handled slightly differently by the different countries. So for instance, we have Jamaica, and we are so happy to have Camille Facey on our board.
Yes.
And the work that Jamaica is doing with their corporate governance practices, the regulations they've put in place, which is really revolutionary and can be a good lesson for us, for the other countries in the region. As you interact a lot with directors, both in the private sector and the non-for-profit sector, are you finding that there is a level of willingness on the part of directors to recognize how different governance practices ought to be, is in today's world, but what obtained in the last 10, 15 years?
I think it varies really, and the reason I say it varies as well is because through my association, we are an association, as I said, of member firms, but the niche area that we are in is that there are international companies. And you will find with international companies, because of the reporting standards they have to meet, because of the fact that, ESG is becoming more prevalent and having an impact in the way in which companies do business, you are definitely seeing more of an emphasis on good governance practices, in those sort of international spaces, even here in Barbados. And then, of course, on the other hand, sitting on not-for-profits, charities, etc., boards where people have come together as volunteers, where they don't necessarily have the training and the understanding, it's been a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a struggle necessarily, but you just have to really impart knowledge to try to get people to understand that there are certain standards that they should be meeting. I find that if it's not something that is going to be before shareholders or before the public, etc., in terms of reporting on what your board is doing, that people take a little bit more of a lax approach. When it comes to, directors attending all of the meetings that they should, directors reviewing all of the documents that they should, and be prepared to actively participate in discussion and bring their opinion. That I find in the, I guess, more or less regulated not-for-profit space is a little bit more of a challenge.
Yes, and I would imagine that's the same for most of the countries in the Caribbean, that when we have multinationals, listed companies, their focus on governance is much more and a bit different from those, even in the state sector, which is a little bit sad because in the state sector is where we really need good governance.
And
I
that's why,
know,
as you mentioned about what Jamaica is doing, I also found that very inspirational. And that was one of the things I appreciated being introduced to by the CCGI. You know, the sort of standards that Jamaica has set in terms of governance of their statutory corporations, in terms of appointments by the ministers of their boards. And I think it's really revolutionary. And I would love to see those practices adopted in Barbados and the wider Caribbean as well.
yes. And so just for persons to know, in case anyone is listening in and are not familiar, in Jamaica, there is now a law which requires for directors to be trained. And there is a database of persons who have been trained in corporate governance, from which all officials who are to be appointed to state boards must be selected. So therefore, you are starting with having persons with some measure of training in corporate governance, even before they get appointed to state boards, which is really excellent
Yes.
because it prepares you for understanding that role of governance, which a lot of persons, they confuse governance and management. They go in and they actually interfere with management sometimes, creating bigger issues for the organization instead of they being able to be a help and an advisor to the management team. So it's also a practice I'm hoping we will see in Trinidad and Tobago and many of the other Caribbean islands because we can learn from Jamaica how it worked, what were the teething problems that they have encountered and how we may be able to avoid some of them. And as we are discussing the state sector a little bit, I know that you were also involved in a lot of those organizations which try to support the government in its objective. And so Barbados also has some equally wonderful things that we can look to and celebrate. One of the things I have shared over the years that I was truly impressed with was you have a name for it, the Barbados Golden Passport or something like
Oh,
that.
the welcome stamp.
Yes, yes, which allowed the persons to move to Barbados for a full year without requiring a formal work permit. So
Yes.
during the whole COVID period, persons could have left their cold countries and terrible winters because they're working remotely and go to Barbados in the wonderful sunshiny weather and be able to complete their work. So that was a very innovative thing done by the Barbados government. Are there other areas in within the government sector that you see in some strides that would help propel the country forward in terms of its governance practices as well?
Yes, so we have seen in terms of compliance has become a very big focus for us. Um, as with Trinidad, we know that the Financial Action Task Force had been scrutinizing in terms of our financial system, etc. And we had some principles that we had to meet, which we have now. We've been removed from the gray list. But as a result of that, we definitely saw there was more of an emphasis on compliance. There was more of an emphasis on regulation. And I mean, Barbados has always prided itself on being a well-regulated jurisdiction, but you're seeing agencies such as the Financial Services Commission, the central bank, etc., setting out more and more guidelines for companies to follow. Now, one of the challenges, though, of course, which from our perspective in BIBA, is that we always call for right-sized regulations because you have these impositions coming from outside, from the supranational regulatory bodies that don't necessarily take into account the true picture of operating in a small island state. With limited resources, not only limited financial resources, but even just limited human capital. And so therefore, we always try to feed back to our various agencies and government to say, okay, well, you have presented these guidelines and these regulations to us, but let us tell you how in practice this really works. and how in practice we can, operationalize these guidelines in a way that doesn't disenfranchise, our various companies, cause penalties to be imposed, etc., because unrealistic expectations have been set. So we're very pleased to have a good working relationship with the regulatory bodies. Next week we're having a meeting with the Central Bank of Barbados to discuss more collaboratively working together. We have regular updates to our members in the wider business community from our other government agencies that support us. So on Friday, we'll be having a session ourselves, and we're going to have input from the Barbados Revenue Authority, the Financial Services Commission, the International Business Unit. These are the agencies that actually support global business in Barbados. And it is important for us to be able to work collaboratively and not contentiously, because we all have the goal of propelling Barbados forward and its economic growth. So it's best that instead of there being an imposition from government, that it's really a partnership as we develop these new business models, et cetera, to take the economy and the country forward.
But that sounds so great, because it's the type of model that you could now share with the other Caribbean islands, because all of us deal with exact issue. How do we comply with a lot of these rules that are imposed on us by organizations that don't understand our reality? And I'm hopeful in the future it is something that CCGI can get involved with as a Caribbean-based nonprofit, that we can together help in a bigger platform for being able to fight the good fight in getting for the region from some of the more harsher impositions on the Caribbean region.
So, for example, we had an interesting meeting last week, a week before, while the UN, the UNCTAD conference was taking place in Barbados. We also had a visit from the head of the ILO. And so it was one of the interesting things where he sat with us. So it was us, the private sector, and it was the heads of the trade union. So the private sector leadership and the trade union leadership all sitting around in a U-shaped table with him. And, one of the things he said is that there are so many countries where this could not happen, where it would just be, they would just come to blows or arguments, that you just could not have a cordial meeting where you could hear. So, he asked us about issues in labor and issues in the private sector, and sort of we just had a discussion where we could find common ground, etc. So it was very cordial, and I was very pleased, because I know that our social partnership, we do have our challenges. I mean, obviously, each of us, government, labor, private sector, have different constituents whose needs we have to meet and whose mandates we have to fulfill. But we do come together on the big issues. Again, during COVID, the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister chairs the social partnership, and then the Minister of Labor chairs certain subcommittee meetings. But the fact that we would come together collaboratively and make decisions about whether or not we should keep our borders open, excuse me, whether or not there should be a vaccine mandate, all these various discussions that were important to keeping the stability of the country during this very difficult time, we were able to collaboratively make those decisions.
And that too is really amazing. That is great leadership, where you were able to get persons to feel that they can comfortably share their views, so that you can get a solution that helps everyone to be able to accept what may be in the better interest of the country as a whole. So nice. Now, there's one other area I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and this is the global minimum tax that had really impacted Barbados to quite a bit. Can you share a little bit with us on where that is at now?
So in November last year, our Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Motley, would have made a parliamentary statement announcing to the world that we were moving forward with increasing or raising our tax rate to be in compliance with the global minimum tax. And so therefore, what you've seen now as of January 1, our tax rate across the board has moved to 9%. Still competitive within the Caribbean. However, prior to that, it was a maximum of 5%. And then for companies that are earning the equivalent of 75 million euros or more, they now have a tax rate of 15% imposed upon them. And so this has had an impact because obviously because the majority of our global business is from Canada, we were moving in tandem with Canada, and Canada had announced that they were going to move as well to adopt the global minimum tax. They have not quite done it as yet before the 2025 deadline, but the expectation is that they will do it at some point this year, and then they will retroactively impose the tax on their companies. But because we did not want to be out of step with Canada, we moved as well. So what unfortunately we have seen happen is that some companies, especially those that have alternatives such as Cayman or Bermuda, Bahamas, that have not moved as yet, we have seen not many, but some companies relocate. However, at the end of the day, our compliance, again, is very important because we do not want to be blacklisted. Blacklisting, brings many more headaches and many more problems. It makes international investment extremely difficult for Barbados. We would have gone through with, again, after we were not fully compliant with the FATF prerogatives, then what would have happened is that we ended up being blacklisted by the EU. And the knock-on effect of that is that all financial transactions coming out of the EU banking community had to face enhanced due diligence. And we would have seen some deals that just could not get off the ground because they could not get the funds into Barbados as quickly and effectively, could not get approvals, etc. So it was very important for us to be able to come off that blacklist, to be able to come off the UK blacklist as well. And so therefore, we're always very conscious of that when our government makes these decisions, because we want to be always seen as being compliant with these regulations, because we rely so much on global business. Global business meets the majority, at least 60% of the corporate tax take by the Barbados Revenue Authority. It comes from global business. And so therefore, even though there are far less global business companies in Barbados than there are domestic companies, the volume of the business and the level of transactions, the amount of money that passes through Barbados, and therefore, in taxes, fees, licenses, etc., contribute to the Barbados economy. In 2013, this was estimated at close to $1 billion Barbados, which is roughly 500 million US dollars. So this was extremely important to our economy.
And it's great that, Barbados has a system in place that you're able to actually capture that data. So the decisions are being made on the basis of evidence that is real and not just a projection and a hope that this is how it works. And, that too is another lesson for us in the region, because the entire region, we are notorious for not keeping records and sharing information with persons within the areas who need to have that data in order that we can make informed decisions. So this is a reflection I want to share with everyone of the level of detail, the amount of information that is shared when we have sessions here at CCGI, and it helps all of us to learn, to grow, to be more aware. And so to take that additional level of competence when we sit with our own teams, whether it's in boardrooms or management teams, to be able to help our organizations grow and prosper. So, Kamel, as we bring this half hour to a close, I wanted to go back to Governance Week a little bit and say, we are so proud that we have Professor John Elkington, who will be delivering the opening keynote on Sunday, June 16th. Governance Week is an online event that levels the playing field for us in the region. Everyone is able to join in just as easily. We also want to thank our sponsors for Governance Week. I'm so pleased. We have two gold sponsors. That is First Citizens Bank here in Trinidad and Tobago and the Massey Group. We also have several bronze sponsors. So thank you to Angostura Limited, Republic Bank, the National Gas Company, PwC Trinidad, and from Belize for the first time, we have sponsorship from GA Rowe and Sons. And yesterday we had Alistair as one of our guests for Governance Live. So we were able to learn quite a lot about GA Rowe and Sons. So we have 5 days of conference speakers from throughout the region where we will be discussing a whole range of governance issues, particularly our theme of regenerative capitalism. The idea is how do we look at our social impact? And that, Carmel, I think, is where we would learn a lot from Barbados, because what we want ultimately, our sub-theme, is promoting exceptional governance for small cities. And that's where we want to go. All right. And we can achieve that with the help of everyone adding their 2 cents. When we bring together all of our skills and competence and our experience, we can do so much more together.
Definitely.
So, thank you.
Thank you too, Kamla. And thank you to our audience here this morning who joined us online and who will watch the recording. Really encouraging you, after you've heard everything that Kamla has said, to join us for Governance Week.
Yes. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Okay.